In the case of everything that befalls you, remember to turn to yourself and see what faculty you have to deal with it. If you see a handsome lad or woman, you will find continence, the faculty to employ here. If hard labor is laid upon you, you will find endurance. If reviling, you will find patience to bear evil. And if you habituate yourself in this fashion, your external impressions will not run away with you. Here in chapter 10, towards the very end of the chapter, Epictetus is introducing a term, rather offhandedly, that we ought to read into the entire approach of the Enchiridion. He's talking about what we translate in English as habituation, the production of a habit, of a lasting disposition that is going to take us from moment to moment to moment in a kind of continuity. And the Greek term here is the infinitive of it would be ethizesthai. He's got it in the participle here as ethizomenon. And he's talking about what a person needs to do with certain considerations. He talks about habituating yourself in this way. Hutos ethizomenon. What does that mean? It means that we have to try and even sometimes succeed over and over again until we gradually consolidate within the fabric of our character, within the fabric of our personality, a new habit. And it may require breaking some old habits, as an ancillary to that as well. So what is he talking about here? This entire chapter has to do with our capacities, our resources. And before going into looking at the text itself, it's worth reflecting on this. When we get ourselves into difficult situations, one of the most common experiences that we do have is feeling like we're not up to what's being demanded of us, that we can't respond to it. That we don't have the capacity, even though other people might have the capacity, we just don't. Again, I've used this as an example in other places. When younger people these days say the fragment, "I can't even," they're expressing something like that. And usually it's erroneous. When people say, "I can't handle something," at a certain level, it's because they choose not to be able to handle it. There are, in fact, some things that people in their current state of life cannot handle, but those are much less frequent than we would like to tell ourselves. So Epictetus here tells us about several different problems that could come up. He says, in the case of everything that befalls you, remember to turn to yourself and see what faculty you have to deal with it. That's the general form, and we'll come back to that in a moment. That's a great sentence. Also, this is one of those dogmata that you could, memorize and then repeat to yourself. If you see a handsome lad or woman, you will find continence, the faculty to employ here. So what's he talking about? Well, when you look at a beautiful body, wherever your attractions happen to lie, you see something that, as we say, gets your motor running, right? Whatever it is that appeals to you. This could be other things too, right? Maybe you have a craving for certain kinds of food. But when you see that, and the whole mechanics of your desire starts to get working, you have within yourself, according to the Stoics, the capacity, the dunamis, for managing your desires. For what he's translating here as continence, we would translate that today as something like self-control. You have a capacity for self-control. People who don't exhibit self-control often tell themselves that I just don't have self-control, and they make excuses about how the thing itself tempted them or the situation, just made it so that they had to act in a certain way. Epictetus says, well, no, that's really a choice. It may be difficult, but it's a choice. And so when we see something that's attractive to us, that engages our erotic desire, we have the capacity to say, No, or we can even say, well, yes, but only in this respect or only to this degree or something along those lines. And this is something really well worth considering given the fact that in our contemporary culture, advertisers learned long ago that lessons, sex sells. It certainly sells something. At the very least, it gets people's attention focused on sex. And so we're bombarded with images constantly that are deliberately designed to get us to feel desire. When you're watching shows on television or on Netflix or a movie or something like that, there's often scenes that are introduced precisely because they felt that, well, we need to have something sexy at this point, right? And they don't usually pick ugly people to be the actors. They pick people that we find attractive. People who would never, if this is a real story, never look like that. If you've ever looked at those, true-to-life stories and you look at the person who they're depicting, they usually don't look like a Hollywood actor or actress. But this is something good to keep in mind. We do have within ourselves, maybe not fully developed the way we'd like it, that's where habituation comes in, but we do have within ourselves the capacity for self-control. He says, if hard labor is laid upon you, you will find an endurance. This is another thing that the Greeks stressed. There's lots of times where we have to do work that we don't really feel like doing. And it could be all sorts of examples. It could be on the job. It could be at home. Who's doing the various chores that are required to keep a household going, or think even on a larger scale, to maintain a yard, or even bigger, a farm. Somebody has to do the work. And sometimes it's not fair how it's apportioned out. But if you have endurance, and you do have the capacity for endurance within you, you can get through it. Here should be some other examples. You're driving somewhere. Your car breaks down. Do you actually get out and try to fix it? Do you take a walk and try to get to a service station? Do you try to flag a car down? Or do you just sit in your car and mumble to yourself how unfair this is and hope that somebody else will come along and solve the problem for you? I suppose you can say, well, we have AAA to deal with that sort of thing here in America, and I guess that's right. We outsource a lot of our endurance in many respects. But, when you're called upon, do you actually have the endurance that's required? That is a matter to some degree of choice, looking within. He says, if reviling, when people are saying bad things about you, when people are insulting you, when people are chewing you out, as we say, you will find patience to bear evil. And it doesn't mean that you're not saying that it's not evil or bad. He says, anexakakian, right? That's what you will find. A mastery, literally, a mastery of wickedness. Do you have to stoop to their level? Do you have to believe what they're saying and slink away and be depressed? No, you don't have to engage them. You can actually follow Epictetus' advice that he gives in other places and come back with the one-liner, well, if that's what you have to say, you clearly don't know me very well, because if you did know me, then you would also know my other faults as well. This is something that we do have as a human capacity within us, but it does require cultivation. This is why he goes on and he says, if you habituate yourself in this fashion, your external impressions will not run away with you, your fantasia. What are the fantasia? Well, let's go back to the reviling. So somebody's in your office and they come in and they say terrible things about your work product, and you don't know what you're doing, and they're going to write you up, and we could add all sorts of other things in there, right? They finish it off by saying, you should have been fired long ago. Now, there's a lot of external impressions or appearances going on there. Some of them are what the person is actually doing, and some of them are being generated by the judgments you yourself are bringing in, which you may have taken in from the culture. Like, well, you should never let anyone talk to you like that, because why not? Well, if you do, then the next person who comes along is probably also going to talk to you that way. And then if they do that, then it's going to be a whole crowd of people bullying you, and you're never going to be able to get anything done, and your life is going to be just a miserable mess. And, notice what we've done there. We've sort of gone out of control in the thought process. All these appearances have been kind of piling up, and we are the creatures that can determine how we use appearances, whether we believe them or not, whether we accept them as being adequate representations of reality, or whether we distance ourselves and say, maybe I'll test these out, and I'll use what I know as a criterion or a canon to measure them. So Epictetus says that's what we ought to do. We should habituate ourselves to looking within ourselves for resources to deal with the problems that we encounter. And then if we do that, these external impressions are not going to decide for us. We're not allowing them to be determinative. So I want to go back to the very first sentence. He says, remember to turn to yourself. Isn't that an interesting thing to say? Ultimately, the goal is not that you can simply parrot Epictetus and say, well, Epictetus said, da 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 da. Rather, you want to make whatever it is that you take from Stoic philosophy, from the Enchiridion, for example, part of your own makeup. You choose whether you take in what he has to say. The dogmata, the ideas that you can have ready to hand. And if you do that, the promise is that you will live a happier life. You will be free. You will not be bothered by all the other things that could go wrong, because you'll be focusing on what really does belong to you. So this is actually some really useful advice, and as a follow-up to that, I think it's well worth spending some time on considering not only what could go wrong, or what we think to be going wrong in life, but what resources, what powers, what capacities we do indeed have within ourselves first, and then secondly, what it would take for us to further develop them so that they would be much more effective. Never say about anything, I have lost it, but only I have given it back. Is your child dead? It has been given back. Is your wife dead? She has been given back. I have had my farm taken away. Very well, this too has been given back. Yet it was a rascal who took it away. But what concern is it as of yours, by whose instrumentality the giver called for its return? So long as he gives it you, take care of it as a thing that is not your own, as travelers treat their inn. Chapter 11 suggests a kind of transformation of perspective that we ought to carry out when we feel a sense of loss, or perhaps even a sense of grief, and then might end up, because of the way in which we think and feel, end up feeling sad or anxious or angry or any other sorts of troubling emotions as a result. He says, never say about anything, I have lost it. It's not a loss. Rather, reframe the situation for yourself as I have given it back. Now, what's the difference there? Well, when you say that I have lost it, the assumption is that the thing really does belong to you, that it is your property and you have title to it, and any sort of being bereft of it, or it being removed, or it being destroyed is somehow against you yourself. And Epictetus says, no, you don't really own any of these things that you think of yourself as owning, including your body. but certainly not your relationship, certainly not your celebrity or fame or reputation, certainly not whatever powers or responsibilities people have entrusted you with or you've acquired, certainly not your wealth, certainly not your other possessions. All of that is things that, in a certain respect, don't belong to you and may not, in fact, belong in any real sense to anyone except for the giver. And who does he mean by the giver? Epictetus is religious, so he does think that this is Zeus or God. His conception of Zeus is of sort of, God with a capital G. So he says, is your child dead? That's, for us, an occasion to mourn. It's really a terrible thing to lose a child. But it's not your child in the sense of your ownership, and that because you want that child involved in your life, the world has to conform itself to your wishes and make sure that that occurs. That's not reality. You have, as he says, given it back. You may not have chosen to give it back, but you have given it back. I've had my farm taken away. Or my wife is dead. She has been given back. Your farm has been given back. And now he brings up a sort of objection that many of us have. It's not fair. In the case of a child or a spouse, it was too soon. Why? Why did this have to happen now? If I could have and we go through all these mental, somersaults about what could have been different in the situation. Same thing with the farm. It's a rascal who took it away from me. We can say the same thing. The government took it away. The bank took it away. The hurricane took it away. Those looters took it away. And what's the problem with that? Epictetus says, well, why does it matter to you who took it away? What matters is that it was given back. He says, what concern is it of yours by whose instrumentality? The robber was just an instrument of the giver. The giver called for its return. The hurricane, the tornado, was the giver calling for its return. The disease was the giver calling for its return. The car accident, same thing. So he says, so long as he gives it to you, take care of it as a thing that is not your own, as travelers treat their inn. Now that could be interpreted in two very different ways. If you've ever stayed in public housing like that, like a dorm room, or in certain places where people pay money and then think, well, since I'm paying money, I can do whatever I want to this place. He's not talking about that. It's not that you shouldn't take care of the things that you have been temporarily granted, like a child or a wife or a farm or a car or a position of responsibility or the capacity to engage with other people on social media, whatever it is that you want to talk about. You should take care of those things. But don't take care of them as if you are taking care of something that you own and you're only taking care of it because you care about how it affects you. Take care of it because that's the right thing to do. Somebody's given you something, you're going to have to give it back. Take care of it until you have to. And then when you have to take it back, or when they take it back and you have to give it back, do so willingly, and you're not going to be so upset. You'll probably still be upset. But it's not just for the Stoic about whether we are upset or not. We will get upset quite often. It's about what happens after we get upset. Do we just remain in that funk forever? Do we turn against the rest of the world in resentment and bitterness? Or do we continue on? We don't even have to say move on as if we're leaving everything behind. Do we continue on with the project and the life that we have chosen as the good one? If you wish to make progress, dismiss all reasoning of this sort. If I neglect my affairs, I shall have nothing to live on. If I do not punish my slave boy, he will turn out bad. For it is better to die of hunger, but in a state of freedom from grief and fear, than to live in plenty, but troubled in mind. And it is better for your slave boy to be bad than for you to be unhappy.
Begin, therefore, with the little things. Your paltry oil gets spilled, your miserable wine stolen. Say to yourself, this is the price paid for a calm spirit. This is the price for peace of mind. Nothing is got without a price. And when you call your slave boy, bear in mind that it is possible he may not heed you, and again, that even if he does heed, he may not do what you want done. But he is not in so happy a condition that your peace of mind depends upon him.
Chapter 12 contains some really excellent advice for us about how to live the Stoic life. And Epictetus starts out saying, if you want to make progress, so the assumption there is, well, perhaps you haven't been making progress, or you're just starting out. Here's what you want to keep in mind. So he says, if you want to make progress, here's what you have to do. Dismiss or let go, aphes. It's, by the way, that's the same word that's used in the New Testament, in the same, essentially, Greek writing, the koine, to talk about forgiveness, letting go. Let go all reasoning of this sort. If I neglect my affairs, I shall have nothing to live on. If I'm not always managing my money, I'm going to be destitute. If I don't take this other job here, if I don't constantly manage this over here, everything's going to fall apart. If I don't punish my slave boy, he will turn out bad. Now, we don't keep slaves anymore, except for those of us who are modern-day barbarians, but we certainly have a lot of relations which are quite similar, where people are in a one-down position, oftentimes because we're paying them, but not paying them very much. We also treat our technology very much as if it were slaves in the ancient times. And so he says, if I don't punish this person, he's going to turn out bad. And Epictetus says, look, it's better to die of hunger, but in a state of freedom from grief and fear, than to live in plenty, but troubled in mind. There's a fundamental transformation of value that goes on within Stoic philosophy. If you really buy Stoic philosophy, then what counts as good is what's within you. Are you troubled or are you untroubled? Are you miserable or are you happy? And so, living in a place where you have enough to eat, but you're miserable all the time is not actually a gain, according to Epictetus. So he says, it's better for your slave boy to be bad than for you to be unhappy. If you expect perfection out of everybody around you, you are going to be the most miserable person around. If you even confine yourself just to the things that you think you're buying, or you have a right to be insistent about, you're probably going to be unhappy. If you go into a restaurant, here's a sort of classic example. If you go into a restaurant and you order some food, there's many ways in which things can go bad. Who does it almost always get taken out on, at least in American restaurants? On the server. Because the server is the interface between the person who's eating, the patron, and the entire rest of the restaurant, the front of the house and the back of the house. Sometimes the manager might get called in as well. But, the server comes out, and if you expect that somebody who is serving person after person after person is somehow supposed to treat you as if you're kings and queens, even if you are paying, lots and lots of money, you're setting yourself up for some disappointment. And there's all sorts of ways in which things can go wrong. The cook might not be totally on top of their game. Maybe the dishes weren't washed as well as you would like, and you notice a speck of food. It's up to you whether you allow that sort of thing to really upset you or not. So he goes on and he says, begin with little things. Why little things? Because it's too hard to do the big things right off the bat. We have to get a few wins under our belt so we feel like we have some momentum. Begin with the little things. Your paltry oil gets spilled. Your miserable wine stolen. Say to yourself, instead of saying, who knocked over this oil? What the hell is going on here? Who stole my wine? Right? Instead of saying those things, he says, say something else. Say to yourself, well, this is the price paid for a calm spirit. This is the price for peace of mind. If I want to keep my cool, if I want to stay on track with my project of working on my life, and someday down the line actually not getting upset about these things like I'm getting upset right now, then what I need to say is, well, that's the price that I have to pay. This is not just a matter of passivity, of just sucking up whatever anybody doles out to you. This is being realistic about how these things affect you and whether you indeed play some role in that or have a choice in whether these things affect you. And that's a very important thing to keep in mind, because if you don't constantly remember that early on as a Stoic, you won't make progress. So he says, nothing is gotten without a price. Everything costs something. We tend to think that once we've purchased something, it's ours. We get to do whatever we want with it. If I've paid the price, everything better be perfect. Now, how often is that actually the case? Think about the wide panorama of human activities and products that you might pay some money for. Or you might get in some other way. You know somebody who knows somebody, and you chat around with them, and you make them feel good, so they'll give you something free, right? They'll comp it to you. Well, you're paying for it. Everything has a price. If you're not willing to pay the price, don't expect the thing. And part of the price is being willing to write some things off and to let them go. To say, this doesn't matter quite so much. So he says, when you call your slave boy, bear in mind it's possible he may not heed you. And again, even if he does heed, he may not do what you want done. But he is not in so happy a condition that your peace of mind depends upon him. Unless you choose for that to be the case. And from the Stoic perspective, if you choose to make how you feel dependent on somebody else who you think is in a lower position than you, you're in a certain respect crazy. And you probably should take a close look at what's going on and fix that. So, he says, when you're asking for somebody to do something, they may not do it. They may not pay attention to you at all. You may have to shout several times to get their attention. Even after you tell them, they may not do what you want them to do. I see this with students all the time. Sometimes students surpass my expectations as an instructor, and that's a pleasant surprise. And a lot of times students need quite a few reminders. Hey, there's an assignment due. Or, you're already late with the assignment, so maybe you want to turn it in. You'll still get some credit, or they turn something in and you're like, you didn't read the instruction sheet at all, did you? And that's a problem. You actually need to follow the directions for this and do the assignment according to the criteria that I gave you so that you learn what I want you to learn in the process. Whether or not I feel okay shouldn't depend on whether those students do what they're going to do. I mean, not if I'm a realist about life and about human nature and about the many different ways in which things can go astray. And we can apply this to anything you like. You can apply this to the workplace. You can apply this to your relationships, whether romantic, familial, friendship. You can apply this to going to a concert. You can apply this to eating in a restaurant. This can be applied to practically anything in life where what the outcome is dependent to some degree on somebody else. It's silly, as he says in that last sentence, for us to give so much power to other people that we allow them to determine whether we're going to be happy or upset.